He was originally a fleeing soldier, scurrying for cover, but he transformed into a merciless killer after finding a set of officer's uniform. What's more terrifying is that this is based on a true event. With 2 months left in World War II, the demoralized German army faced increasing numbers of deserters, and Willi was one of them. The Führer issued a merciless death decree. However, the hunting gendarmes, blowing their trumpets and drinking alcohol, shot aimlessly, seemingly enjoying this deadly game. Fortunately, Willi escaped into the woods and hid in a concealed tree hollow, holding his breath, silently praying for the pursuers to leave quickly. Before long, the impatient pursuers really left, but hunger and cold followed suit, and in the snowy landscape, Willi could only continue to flee aimlessly. Suddenly, he came across an abandoned military vehicle, which seemed like a ray of hope. He rushed to search it and found a warmer military coat, almost fitting boots, and a basket of apples to stave off hunger. As he devoured the food, he uncovered the last layer of a leather case, revealing a brand new captain's uniform. At that moment, he didn't realize that this uniform was a pact with the devil. After donning the uniform, Willi looked the part and even fantasized about being a captain. He put on the monocle, a symbol of power.
Ja, sagen Sie mal, was erlauben Sie sich? Was erlauben Sie sich? Was haben Sie gesagt? Was habe ich gehört da? Ha? Lauf um dein Leben, du kleines Schweinchen. Na los, lauf.
Lost in his enjoyment, Willi was startled by footsteps behind him. Unexpectedly, the man approached, saluted him, saying he had been separated from his troop and hoped to join under Willi's command. But Willi knew well that this man must also be a deserter who mistook him for a captain. Seeing Willi's silence, Freitag, thinking he was hesitating, immediately went to repair the car as a gesture of goodwill. Willi struggled internally. Should he kill the man and continue fleeing, or play the wolf in sheep's clothing? Before he could decide, Freitag gave him the answer, clearly. No one could refuse the sudden sense of superiority. While Freitag was driving, Willi hid the soldier's ID and threw the old clothes out of the window. Willi was secretly thrilled, preferring the allure of unknown privileges over the fear of fleeing. Soon, they arrived at a tavern. As they entered, the whole place went silent. The owner, Schnabel, approached them, asking them to leave. Due to the defeat of the German army, there were many deserters who looted and terrorized the local people. Willi was somewhat taken aback but kept his composure. He took off his coat, took out paper and pen, claiming he wasn't there to cause trouble but to record the people's losses. He announced that whatever they were robbed of could be reported, and the government would fully compensate. The crowd immediately perked up at this, and Willi was willing to write down anything as long as they dared to say it. Willi asked Schnabel to prepare some food, which was his real purpose for the visit. To get more compensation, Schnabel brought out roasted meat and soup, but Freitag, lacking Willi's cunning, snatched the plate eagerly, arousing Schnabel's suspicion. Compared to Freitag's voracious eating, Willi tried to appear restrained and elegant. Despite not having eaten for days, Willi's demeanor didn't dispel Schnabel's doubts. Coincidentally, Schnabel caught a deserter stealing, and he wanted to test Willi's identity once again. Willi knew that a real captain would have only one way to resolve this, so he decisively grabbed the pistol and pulled the trigger without hesitation. From a deserter to a fake captain, Willi was now in too deep, and his demonic journey of slaughter had just begun. Willi drove to a farm, only to find it occupied by deserters. Tensions immediately escalated.
Jetzt erstmal Achtung! Und zwar da liegen! Na los!
Upon seeing the captain's uniform, they realized their folly and quickly put away their guns. However, one of the deserters, Kipinski, noticed a flaw at a glance. The uniforms of high-ranking officers were tailor-made, and Willi's mismatched trousers were a clear giveaway. But Kipinski didn't expose Willi, knowing that as long as he could follow this captain, he wouldn't be considered a deserter. Willi went through the motions of checking the soldier IDs. The farmer accused the 3 deserters of crimes, hoping the high-ranking officer before him would seek justice, but he had no idea that the officer was also a deserter. Instead of punishing anyone, Willi recruited them under his command and changed the unit number on their soldier IDs to his own creation, a special task force. He proclaimed himself as a captain specially appointed by the Führer for this task force. After looting the farm, the group hit the road again, incorporating 2 straggling artillerymen. The group grew larger, and Willi became increasingly brazen, even firing at planes for fun. When their vehicle broke down, he made the soldiers pull the car, while he reveled in his power. Kipinski finally lost his patience and confronted Willi about their destination.
Einsatzgebiet ist geradeaus.
Willi's response enraged Kapinski even more, who rushed at him and pointed a gun at Willi. Just then, the gendarmerie appeared. They were in charge of discipline in the army, and capturing deserters was their primary duty. Willi was extremely frightened, knowing that being exposed would mean certain death. But facing the barrel of the gun, he feigned calmness, angrily shouting at the gendarmerie while getting out of the car.
Was erlauben Sie sich eigentlich? Als verdienter Hauptmann der deutschen Luftwaffe verbitte ich mir diese respektlose Behandlung.
Hearing Willi mention the highest Führer, Captain Signer of the gendarmerie became somewhat apprehensive. In Signer's view, whether the young captain in front of him was real or fake, it wasn't worth the risk. If he was a real captain, then he would offend an officer who could communicate with the Führer. If he was fake, then it was none of his business. Seeing Signer's look falter a little, Willi knew he'd made the right gamble. He directly asked Signer's name and even boldly presented his soldier's ID. At this moment, Signer was already convinced and didn't dare to take the fake ID from Willi's hands. Kapinski, standing nearby, flashed a mysterious smile as if admiring Willi's acting skills, or perhaps celebrating their narrow escape. Subsequently, everyone arrived at the nearby Camp 2, a place specifically for detaining deserters. Suddenly, Willi was struck with panic, because the officer approaching him was Captain Junker, who had once pursued him, and they even ended up in the same vehicle. Willi struggled to maintain composure, trying hard to uphold the dignity of a special envoy of the Führer. Then, Captain Junker spoke.
Wir kennen uns doch. Ich vergesse kein Gesicht.
Willi, tense, thought about fleeing, but Junker, playing with him, said something else.
Uns fällt's bestimmt noch ein.
It seemed that Junker had no intention of exposing him. Willi thought he had dodged a bullet, but at the camp, Junker poured out his grievances to Willi. He said that there were too many deserters here, that it was a burden to feed and house them, and that he had to be on the lookout for them all the time, and the higher-ups were indifferent, causing him a headache. If only all these deserters could be eliminated, it would be so much better, but Shuti was unwilling to take the risk. Hearing this, Willi realized that the camp needed an executioner, someone capable of bearing the guilt, and his identity as the Führer's special envoy was perfect for the role. In the cell, the deserters trembled with fear. These people had committed no real crime, they simply didn't want to fight, but Willi knew if he didn't kill them, he would be the one to die, despite being just a disguised deserter himself. Then, Kapinski suddenly started a fight, obviously overstepping his bounds, but Willi could only turn a blind eye, as his power was not yet solidified. Moreover, he needed someone to do such things. Freitag, unable to bear it, pleaded with Willi to intervene, but Willi coldly said something else.
Die sind schon tot.
So oder so.
With Willi's tacit approval, his men became even more unrestrained, shooting and beating mercilessly, devoid of humanity. The camp supervisor, shocked by the scene, directly pointed out Willi to the Justice Department, hoping for an investigation into Willi's identity and authority. The response given was that it would take 24 hours. Willi panicked slightly, knowing that once his identity was exposed, he would undoubtedly die. Fortunately, Shuti stood by his side. Their interests were intertwined, like grasshoppers on the same rope. He used his connections to bypass the camp supervisor and actually helped Willi obtain special privileges. With this license to kill, Willi completely lost his sanity. A terrible catastrophe finally began to unfold. An anti-aircraft gun was aimed at the deserters, who seemed to understand their grim fate and began to sing a war song. The deserters in the pit were instantly blown to smithereens as rumbling gunfire erupted. Willi, covering his ears, coldly observed everything unfolding. Although Willi was also a deserter not long ago, he showed no mercy in executing the deserters, proving to be more brutal than anyone. When the anti-aircraft gun ran out of ammunition, they continued with machine gun fire. By now, Willi was deeply mired in the quagmire of power, hosting a celebration banquet for himself. Deserters performed on stage while Willi laughed heartily below. In a trance, Willi had forgotten himself, joking about his identity without any reservations.
Ich zum Beispiel habe diese Uniform geklaut.
Who would believe it? Though, behind the laughter is the darkness of human nature. The massacre of compatriots drove many soldiers to break down. Under the influence of alcohol, they fought wildly among themselves, even rushing into the barracks to unleash their perverse bestiality. Seeing the situation spiraling out of control, Willi, furious and assuming the role of a true captain, fired a warning shot near his subordinate's ear. For the deserters, Willi had his own way of dealing with them. He tied them together with a rope, claiming to give them a chance to escape. But when they turned their backs, Willi pulled the trigger without hesitation. The other three, dragging a body, didn't dare to stop. Willi didn't continue shooting. Instead, he handed over the power of execution to the deserters behind him, letting them turn on each other. One chose to shoot, another to commit suicide. Willi enjoyed this thrill. The thrill came not from killing but from the fear in others' eyes when they looked at him. Returning to camp, Willi had his trousers tailored, fully adapting to his new identity. Madness and darkness enveloped the barracks. There were no more deserters, but a graveyard of corpses and bones. Scared, Shooty thought to stop it. Just then, British planes suddenly attacked, and the camp was instantly destroyed. Before Willi could react, a second wave of bombings followed. Yet, even so, Willi's delusion didn't break. He picked up his military cap, donned his coat, and once again gathered his makeshift task force. Miraculously, they were all still alive. Willi immediately promoted everyone. In reality, he could have left without any trouble, but the joy of power had clouded his judgment. Since they couldn't stay at the camp, they headed for the town. Willi set up a makeshift court, judging arbitrarily, plundering civilians, indulging in pleasure without restraint or limit. At that moment, he believed he was not a captain but an omnipotent god. Until the arrival of the gendarmerie, Willi's identity was finally exposed. In a military court, he confessed to his crimes without denial. He was initially set for execution, but a high-ranking officer appreciated Willi. The reason was that Willi's actions hadn't caused any loss to the Wehrmacht. He was just a bit too radical. The current German army needed such talent. Moreover, Willi had proven his extraordinary combat leadership ability. In the end, the judge, with no other option, sentenced Willi to conditional release, instructing him to go to the front lines to form a real special task force and continue underground armed struggles. But let's not forget that Willi was originally just a deserter, and this time, he ran away again. Even if he wore a proper uniform, nothing really changed. Willi could enjoy the thrill that power brings but couldn't fulfill the responsibilities that come with it. Just like some people today, enjoying the benefits of policies but not deserving their positions. Being uplifted by the winds of opportunity doesn't mean they truly have the capability. In 1946, the fleeing Willi was captured by the British and executed at the age of 21. The film The Imposter Captain, released in 2017, doesn't overly depict the cruelty of the battlefield nor narrate the tragic experiences of minorities under the Nazi regime. Instead, it takes a bizarre incident at the end of the war as the entry point, presenting a story of banal evil through cold and solemn black and white cinematography. At the end of the film, the director gives the audience a magical realism egg. Willi and his subordinates travel to modern Germany, driving their makeshift court ostentatiously through the streets. They wave at the crowd. Initially, it appears somewhat comical, but when they start frisking passers-by, seizing cell phones, wallets, and other possessions, nobody can laugh anymore. It's like when a disaster strikes oneself. People then understand that history is ultimately serious and cruel. That's all for today. See you next time.